You wake up one morning and look out the window to discover that the sky is brown. It's not a trick of the light or a blanket of smog, it's the bodies of millions and millions of bugs. The air is so thick with them that they block out the sun. You're terrified, but there's nowhere to run. This is what happens when locusts swarm. Hey, I'm Tasha, and you're watching Animalogic. For thousands of years, locusts have been considered a plague on humanity, which makes sense because they can be a horror show for humans. Before we get into the why, let's start with the what. Locusts are flying insects belonging to the grasshopper family. Locusts make up just a fraction of the species of the grasshopper family. While there are tens of thousands of species of grasshoppers, there are less than 20 species of locusts. Unlike grasshoppers, in the right conditions, locusts get activated and enter a gregarious behavioral state, which is just a fancy way of saying they start to swarm. The most destructive migratory pest in the world is the desert locust species, found in Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. Their swarms can reach into the hundreds of millions or even billions of individuals. Being in the midst of millions of insects is nightmarish, even for the biggest bug fans. Unless you're trying to see Cristiano Ronaldo play, in which case, carry on. Yes, in 2023, locusts flapped into Mecca, Saudi Arabia, covering a soccer stadium and all of its eager onlookers with a blanket of bugs. No one seemed to mind, least of all Ronaldo, who still managed to score 4 goals. But locusts aren't just meme-worthy. They can also have a huge negative impact on humans and have been listed by the UN as the most destructive migratory pest in the world. Let's follow a swarm as it forms and moves across the land. It all started with the rain. The year is 2018, and a series of cyclones bring an unusually high amount of rain to Saudi Arabia's empty quarter, one of the driest and most remote places on Earth. This desert is home to a relatively small number of desert locusts, which survive the arid conditions by eating the little vegetation that grows there. The cyclones created temporary lakes and turned the region into an ephemeral oasis. The remoteness of this region ensured that no humans witnessed the locust bacchanal that was about to take place. The wet sand was also the perfect breeding ground for locust eggs. A single generation multiplies the population by 20. Within a few months, the locust population exploded, and soon they finished all the food in their native habitats. It was at this point that things got real serious. As locust numbers grow, they become more social and form the swarms that you know and loathe. Desert locusts especially are voracious eaters. A large swarm strips anything edible in a matter of minutes and eats away the food supplies of tens of thousands of people per day. So when they run out of food at home, they fly out and eat their neighbors' food. Their neighbors, unfortunately, are the millions of humans who live and farm in semi-arid regions. The arrival of these bugs and the knowledge of what they're capable of causes widespread fear and anxiety. Some regions experience desert locust swarms regularly, but others only see them once every few decades. These places are always the least prepared to deal with a locust swarm. As reports from the region announce the spread of the locusts, like a zombie apocalypse, the communities prepare. Those who find themselves amid the swarm worry about how it's going to affect their livelihoods, the long-term impact on their communities, and even if their families will soon plunge into food insecurity. To make their arrival even more terrifying, locusts are a veritable sensory overload. The eerie soundtrack they produce as they descend is a harbinger of horror. The sound of a swarm of locusts is often described as a rustling or buzzing sound. This noise is caused by 2 things. The first is stridulation, the buzzing and clicking that locusts make by rubbing their legs on their wings. If you've ever heard a cricket chirping, you know what stridulation sounds like. The second part of the oppressive din they make is caused by what's called crepidation. This is the flapping sound locusts make as they snap their wings taut in flight. Combined, these 2 sounds make a commotion as ominous as the score of a Christopher Nolan film. Imagine standing in your field and hearing the muffled buzzing of an approaching swarm of locusts, knowing there's nothing you can do to stop the bugs from gobbling up your hard-won crops. This is exactly what happened to millions of people in 2019. Just as the plague of COVID-19 was descending upon humanity, another superbug of an entirely different sort was about to devastate regions as far-flung as Eastern Africa, the Arabian Peninsula, and the Indian subcontinent. The locusts that had been born in the empty quarter had spread their wings and flown all over the region. They came to be collectively known as the Locust Crisis of 2019 to 2022, which still lingers to a lesser extent today. Billions of locusts swarmed those regions, putting tens of millions of people's lives at risk. Thankfully, it didn't reach plague status, which is the Category 5 hurricane of locust swarms. Plagues take over entire continents and last for several years. This was defined as an upsurge, with most of the damage contained within the Horn of Africa and the Arabian Peninsula. But still, even though it wasn't a full plague, this upsurge of locusts was like nothing anyone had ever seen in decades. Residents in East Africa told of locusts getting absolutely everywhere, even finding locust heads in the stomachs of slaughtered livestock who had nibbled them off while eating what remained of their lunch. Cyclones aren't that unusual in this part of the world, but a string of unfortunate events created a perfect storm for this absolute hurricane of insects. First of all, the empty quarter is virtually inaccessible. There is no locust monitoring in this region. At 1,000 kilometers wide, it's simply too massive to canvass. So the locust populations grew without anyone knowing for months. Had we been privy to it, we could have done something about it. Instead, they reproduced in secret. Later that year, another cyclone hit, driving the breeding of the desert locust even further. And finally, a third cyclone in 2019 did its worst, blowing the swarms that originated there into the Horn of Africa. We can't just call this an act of nature, though, because more frequent cyclones in this region can be directly traced back to changes in our climate. The next unfortunately timed event was the pandemic. No one could have anticipated that the travel restrictions that were put in place to slow the spread of COVID-19 would also slow the response to the swarms of locusts. Pesticides and other equipment that's usually used to combat locusts wasn't able to arrive quickly enough. It was at this point that the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations got involved. We asked Keith Cressman, their senior locust forecaster, to tell us what happened next. Hi, Keith. Tell me what happens when a locust upsurge emerges. How do countries work together to stop it?
The way it works in the country, of course, is that this is always with their national government, of course, okay, and usually in the Ministry of Agriculture. And they have a center, let's say, usually it's quite a small center. And some of the people in the center that are doing the survey and the control. Another one is what we call Locust Information Officer, who manages all of the data. His idea or her idea is basically to send that data more or less every day to FAO. So we have kind of what's going on in the whole world, basically. Data is very important. Without the data, you really can't understand what's happening. And this is just for each country. They're only looking about what's going on in their country. They really don't know what's going on in the country next to them. So this is where FAO, this is our job basically, is to figure out all of the countries, all of the data, understand who's doing survey, who's doing control, and try to work together, which is very important.
Depending on the stage of the swarm and the capabilities of each country, they will use different strategies to deal with the locust. Some try to use biopesticides like green mussel, a fungus that targets locusts specifically, but might take up to 2 weeks to kill the insect. These have the advantage of not harming other animals, like bees and birds. But in extreme cases, chemical pesticides are often the cheapest and fastest way to kill the locusts. They usually die the day after they spray them, but unfortunately, they also kill many other animals in the ecosystem. Thankfully, thanks to the FAO and local governments, and through a combination of traditional pesticides and biopesticides, the locusts were defeated. Fighting the locusts cost over $200 million, and over 4 million tons of food were lost to the insects. It was a wake-up call to get more serious about monitoring them to prevent future upsurges. One of those tools is the amazing eLocust 3, which people use to report locust activity. Easy and early reporting is crucial. Since locusts breed fast and hatch quickly, any delay in dealing with the bugs will ensure another generation is born. And with every generation, the population explodes exponentially. It takes a locust about 2 weeks to hatch from an egg and another 6 weeks to turn into an adult. 1 month later, those new adults are already ready to lay more eggs. With lifespans of only 3 months, it's actually a bit incredible to see how much havoc they can wreak in their short lives. But their numbers can present an opportunity if you can think outside the box. Locusts can be upcycled, and a startup in Kenya focused on doing just that. And and their plan was simply to buy locusts and turn the protein and nutrient bugs into fertilizer or livestock feed. Locusts become immobile at night due to the cooler temperatures. Under the cover of darkness, farmers who had lost their crops to the locust recovered it by grabbing the insects off trees and bushes, like picking grapes out of a grapevine. Then they gathered the animals in sacks, sometimes up to 1 ton of bugs in a single night, and sold them to the Bug Project. To see if they had been poisoned, the locusts were held in the sacks for several days. Those who died in the sack were likely to have been poisoned, so they were turned into fertilizer. And those who survived were considered safe to eat and turned into animal feed. Being over 50% protein, locusts make for a great meal for livestock. This approach allowed income back into the pockets of those most affected by the locust and taught them how to utilize the locusts on their next visit. Hey, if life gives you locusts, make locust aid. Now, we know how their swarms form, so let's get to know our formidable foes at a more personal level. Locusts don't always turn into plagues or even upsurges. In between locust Armageddon times, locusts are solitary creatures that just go about their buggy business. They even look completely different when they're solitary, only leveling up from bland into technicolor after they join the fray. So what flips the switch, turning them into swarms bent on world domination? One study set out to discover just that. Basically, they touched locusts all over their bodies to see what areas, if any, would trigger the swarming instinct. They found that only touching the outside edge of their back legs flipped on the swarming switch. Another study then linked that physical contact with increased serotonin in a specific area of the locust nervous system, which is what ultimately triggers the urge to enter the gregarious phase. So when populations become too concentrated in an area to the point that they're rubbing hindquarters, all individuals are activated to swarm. Any solitary locusts they meet along the way are automatically sucked into the fold. And since they can travel 150 kilometers per day, the swarm can absorb a lot of lone locusts on their path of destruction. This is a path created by voracious hunger that often targets other locusts. Locusts aren't above cannibalism, and a big part of why they move is that they're trying to eat the locust in front of them while simultaneously trying to fly away from the one behind them. It really is a dog-eat-dog world for these insects. When they flap in, locusts can completely devastate rural areas that rely on agriculture for income and food. People have been complaining about locusts since at least as long as we've had writing. The first farmers likely had to deal with them, and they even got a huge shout-out in the Bible as one of the worst possible things that can happen to a society. Since then, over and over, these insects have created refugees out of us humans, forcing farmers to uproot themselves and their families to escape the plagues and find new areas to cultivate. In 2013, a 15-kilometer-long, 500 billion-strong locust plague hit Madagascar, thanks to the favorable conditions caused by Cyclone Haruna. Those insatiable pests gobbled up 100,000 tons of vegetation every single day, causing millions of people to become food insecure. A decade earlier, a 2-year-long outbreak of locusts in West Africa devastated the region, reaching as far north as southern Portugal and the Greek island of Crete. Before that, in 1915, there was the Ottoman Syria locust plague. The biggest swarm ever recorded in North America, or indeed anywhere else in the world, was known as Albert's Swarm in 1875. This gargantuan gathering of Rocky Mountain locusts was said to have contained somewhere between 3 and 12.5 trillion individuals. The swarm would have covered an area of 510,000 square kilometers, or half the size of Egypt. While the Rocky Mountain locust absolutely killed the crops of at least 4 US states at the time, just a quarter of a century later, agriculture would turn around and kill them right back. The last sighting of this devastating bug was made in 1902, and the species has since been extinct due to habitat loss and livestock grazing. As farmers plowed and flooded the ground, and the livestock crushed the soil and exposed the eggs, the locust disappeared. There are no other locust species in North America currently. Let's just hope they don't blow in on the tailwinds of the next human-caused climate event. The most common way to deal with locusts is by spraying them with pesticides, usually when they're in their flightless hopper phase, around 2 weeks after hatching. The best choice is to use a biopesticide, which only targets locusts and is safe for humans and livestock. Despite the existence of this biopesticide, their cheaper alternatives are those chemicals that can also have a negative impact on us. Over 90% of pesticides used in Kenya have been proven to cause serious harm to humans and their livestock. In Kenya, where fried locusts already often make their way to dinner plates, making them a larger part of the menu seems like a win-win solution. Though FAO officials warn against this practice since it's impossible to tell with absolute certainty if the locusts have been sprayed with pesticides. Making animals deal with them directly is another idea. In response to a locust plague in Pakistan, an internet rumor started swarming about the Chinese government sending an army of 100,000 bug-eating ducks to help with the problem. Apparently, this started when an expert on a Chinese news channel said that ducks could be used as biological warfare against these insects. That was enough to start up the international meme mill that a duck army was preparing to waddle into battle against the locusts. Several of these approaches might be tested sooner rather than later, as we expect more upsurges in the next few years as more rain falls in deserts in the region.
Basically, we're expecting, because of the climate change, that it's going to be much more of a problem in East Africa. Another possibility is with the climate change, in terms of the weather and the temperature, basically, they have possibilities for the locusts to move further north than normal. So further up into the southern part of Europe, for example. They won't be able to go up to the Alps, for example. You can't go to the big mountains like that. The other possibilities we're expecting, of course, is during the climate change, is that the seasons will start earlier than normal and finish later than normal. So that means during the summer, during the winter, and during the spring. So this means you have an extra generations or a couple generations of a locust that normally you would not have. And of course, when you have more generation and more locusts, you then have possibilities for an upsurge of plague.
So let's keep monitoring the region and report locusts when you see them. We'll put a link to download the app in the description. If you live in areas where desert locusts exist, you can contribute to stopping the next upsurge. Keith is optimistic that technology is the best way to win the fight.
But I don't think that we're going to really have any plagues. I would not think we have plagues. We haven't had a plague now for 50 years or nearly. And that's mainly because we have, all of these apps. We have good surveys. Countries are much better than they could be in the 1960s and 1970s.
And on top of government agencies, lots of organizations exist that are aimed at helping to quell the flow of bugs and assist those whose lives have been devastated by them. Time and time again, we've seen that when communities come together, they're capable of helping each other through even biblical level plagues. So what should we talk about next? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for new videos every week. Bye.